Hey there, and welcome to Crime for Sleep. I know you're having trouble falling asleep, so let me keep you company with true crime stories from around the world. Before we dive in, I'm curious, where did you first hear this one? If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Now get comfortable, and let's get into tonight's case. Story 1. The clock ticked slower than my breath, each second stretching into the next, refusing to align. I traced my steps from the doorway, sure I had locked it, but the handle lay ajar like a secret waiting to be told. In the dim room, the shadows danced out of rhythm, contradicting the steady glow of the lamp that should have flickered. My fingers brushed the old armchair, and the fabric seemed unfamiliar, a texture misplaced. An unseen weight pressed in, as if time itself had sighed and the pattern broke. What was missing had found a way back. The nausea sits in my stomach like a stone, not the sharp kind that comes with illness, but something heavier, more permanent. It's been there for days now, maybe weeks. I've stopped counting. The feeling reminds me of swallowing mud as a child, that thick coating on the tongue that no amount of water could wash away. I keep returning to that chair, the one with the burgundy fabric that felt wrong under my fingertips. It should have been velvet, I think, but it wasn't. The weave was coarse, almost scratchy, like burlap dressed up for company. Someone had been sitting there recently. The cushion held an impression, a hollow that spoke of weight and time, but I live alone, have always lived alone. The taste of copper fills my mouth when I think too hard about it, metallic and sharp, like sucking on old coins. My grandmother used to say that taste meant you were about to remember something important. She was wrong about most things, but maybe not that. There's a photograph on the side table. I don't remember placing it there. The frame is silver, tarnished at the edges, and the image shows two people standing beside a lake. One of them might be me, but the face is blurred, as if the camera moved at the crucial moment. The other figure is clearer, wearing a dark coat that reaches almost to the ground. Their hand rests on my shoulder, or what I think is my shoulder. The pressure feels real even now, a phantom touch that makes my skin crawl. The detective asked about the photograph. That's when I knew something had shifted, when the questions began to feel like accusations wrapped in politeness. Her voice was steady, professional, but her eyes kept darting to the window as if she expected someone to appear there. I told her I'd never seen it before, which might have been true. Memory is a liar, especially when it comes to things we'd rather forget. The smell of lavender haunts the room. It shouldn't be there. I don't use lavender anything, never have. The scent is too cloying, too sweet, like flowers left too long in water. But it clings to the air, persistent and wrong. Sometimes I catch it strongest near the chair, as if someone wearing lavender perfume had spent hours there waiting. I dream of hands, not violent hands, nothing so dramatic. Just hands that gesture in ways I don't understand, fingers that point at things I can't see. In the dreams, I'm always trying to follow where they led, but my feet won't move. I'm stuck in place while those hands wave and beckon, growing more insistent with each passing moment. I wake with the taste of copper stronger than ever. The detective mentioned a missing person. The name floated past me like smoke, familiar but untouchable. She said they'd been asking about me, that my address was written in their notebook. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, as if they'd traced the letters multiple times to get them right. But I don't remember giving anyone my address. I'm careful about things like that, have to be. The chair faces the window, angled just so. From there you can see the path that leads to the main road. Anyone sitting there would have a perfect view of who comes and goes. The thought makes my skin prickle. How long had someone been watching? How many times had I passed by that window, unaware of eyes following my movement? There's a teacup on the kitchen counter, bone china with tiny blue flowers, delicate as breath. I don't own dishes like that. My cups are thick ceramic, practical things that won't break if dropped. but there it sits, a ring of dried tea staining the bottom, as if someone had finished their drink and simply walked away. The detective photographed it from multiple angles, her camera clicking like an insect. The weight in my chest grows heavier when I try to piece things together. It's not guilt exactly, though guilt might be part of it. More like the feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff in fog, knowing there's a drop but not seeing how far down it goes. My body knows things my mind refuses to acknowledge. I keep checking the locks, door, windows, even the ones that haven't been opened in years. The mechanisms feel loose under my fingers as if they've been worked recently. Oil on the hinges that I didn't apply. Scratches around the keyhole that weren't there before, or maybe they were, and I'm only noticing now because noticing has become a necessity. The lavender smell is strongest in the morning. It greets me like an unwelcome visitor, thick and cloying in the still air. I've searched every corner of the house looking for the source. No sachets, no dried flowers, no bottles of perfume. The scent exists without origin, a ghost made of molecules and memory. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looks tired. Not just tired, but worn thin, like fabric washed too many times. The face staring back seems familiar but distant, as if I'm looking at a photograph of someone I used to know. The eyes are the worst part. They hold knowledge I don't want to claim. The detective asked about my routine. What time do I leave? What time do I return? Do I always take the same route? Her questions felt like a map being drawn, connecting points I couldn't see. I told her my schedule varies, which is true. Routine makes you predictable, and predictable isn't safe, but someone had learned my patterns anyway. There's a space on the bookshelf where something used to be. The dust outline shows rectangular, about the size of a journal. I don't remember what was there, but its absence feels significant. The books on either side have fallen inward, creating a gap like a missing tooth. When I try to remember what belonged in that space, my head fills with static. The copper taste comes strongest when I touch the doorknob. Metal on metal, the flavor of electricity and fear. My palm sweats against the brass, leaving prints that fade as soon as I pull away. But other prints remain, fainter but persistent, whorls and ridges that don't match my own. Sleep comes in fragments now. I drift off in the chair, wake on the couch, find myself standing at the window with no memory of getting there. The house rearranges itself while I'm unconscious, or maybe I'm the one doing the rearranging. Objects migrate from room to room. The teacup appears in different locations, always empty, always stained. The photograph bothers me most at night. The blurred face seems to shift in the lamplight, features becoming clearer, then dissolving again. Sometimes I think I recognize the expression, a look of trust or expectation that makes my stomach clench. Other times the face appears frightened, eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes just before understanding. I remember a conversation, though I can't place when or where it happened. Someone asking if I was happy living alone, if I ever got lonely. My answer was automatic, rehearsed, but their follow-up caught me off guard. They wanted to know what I did with loneliness, how I made it bearable. I must have given some response, but all I can recall is the weight of their attention, the way they listened as if my words held special meaning. The detective showed me a map. Red circles marked locations, connected by lines that formed a pattern I couldn't interpret. My house sat at the center, a focal point for activity I didn't remember participating in. She asked if any of the other locations looked familiar. They did and didn't, the way places do in dreams where everything is almost right but fundamentally wrong. The armchair has been moved, just slightly, a few inches closer to the window, but enough to change the angle of view. From this new position, you can see further down the path, catch sight of approaching visitors sooner. I don't remember moving it, but my back aches as if I'd been wrestling with heavy furniture. There's a rhythm to the house now that wasn't there before, creaks and sighs that follow a pattern like breathing or heartbeat. The sounds are loudest at night when the silence should be complete. I've started timing them, counting the intervals, but the numbers never add up the same way twice. The missing person's notebook contained more than my address. The detective mentioned sketches, observations, questions written in margins. Someone had been studying me, documenting my habits with the thoroughness of a scientist. The thought should anger me, but instead it brings a strange comfort. To be watched is to matter, to exist in someone else's world. My hands shake when I make tea now. The simple act of boiling water, measuring leaves, has become complicated by the memory of that bone china cup. I use my thick ceramic mugs, but they feel wrong in my grip, too heavy and graceless. My fingers remember a different weight, a more delicate handle. The lavender scent is fading. Each day it grows a little weaker, like a radio station drifting out of range. Part of me wants to preserve it, to capture what remains in bottles or jars. But another part, the part that tastes copper and checks locks, feels relief at its disappearance. I found a key in my coat pocket, small and brass, worn smooth by handling. It doesn't fit any lock in my house, but it feels familiar in my palm, warm as if recently held by other fingers. The detective asked to see it, photographed it against a ruler for scale. She didn't tell me what it might open, but her expression suggested she had theories. The dreams are changing. The hands still gesture, but now they're pointing inward toward me instead of away. In the latest dream, I'm the one sitting in the burgundy chair, watching through the window as a figure approaches down the path. The figure moves slowly, deliberately, as if they know they're being observed. When they reach the door, they don't knock, they use a key. The weight in my chest has shifted, settling lower, becoming part of my foundation. It no longer feels foreign but familiar, like an old injury that aches before storms. The detective calls less frequently now, her questions becoming more general, less pointed. Perhaps she's found other leads, or perhaps she's simply learned to read the silence in my voice. The teacup has disappeared. I searched every room, every cabinet, but found no trace of bone china or blue flowers. Its absence feels more significant than its presence ever did. Some things exist only to vanish, leaving behind questions that multiply in empty spaces. The photograph remains, though the faces seem clearer now. The blurred figure might indeed be me, but a version I don't recognize, someone more open, less careful. The person in the dark coat has kind eyes, patient hands. They're waiting for something or someone. Their expression holds the certainty of answered prayers. I understand now why the chair was positioned just so, why the lavender lingered, why the key felt warm in my palm. Understanding doesn't bring relief, only a different kind of weight. The copper taste has become permanent, a flavor that defines rather than disturbs. The detective won't be calling anymore. The case has been closed, filed away with other mysteries that resist solution. But the house remembers what official reports forget. The shadows still dance out of rhythm. The clock still measures time in breaths rather than seconds. What was missing has indeed found a way back, not as presence, but as absence made visible. The empty spaces speak louder than filled ones ever could. In the silence between ticks, in the gap on the bookshelf, in the phantom pressure of hands on shoulders, the truth arranges itself like furniture in a room I'm still learning to inhabit. The door stands slightly ajar, neither invitation nor barrier, but something in between. The pattern remains broken, time continues to sigh, and I sit in the burgundy chair, watching the path for figures that may or may not come. The weight has settled completely now, no longer foreign but fundamental, as much a part of me as breath or heartbeat. The lavender is gone, but its memory lingers in the spaces between certainty and doubt. Some sense, like some truths, exist beyond the reach of evidence or explanation. They simply are persistent as shadows, patient as photographs, inevitable as the gap where something important used to be. Story 2. It wasn't the first time the front gate hung a little open. The latch seemed fine, but the chain never quite matched up the way it should. I noticed the faded paint along the garden path where footprints once pressed into the earth, following a trail left by weeds and whispers. The mailbox had a way of staying shut longer than expected, collecting only the dust of forgotten messages. At least, nobody seemed to mind. I went back inside, smoothing the curtains, aware of the drafts that occasionally slipped in unannounced. The gate creaked again, softly closing behind me. That sound, the metal scraping against metal. I hear it even when I'm not there, even when the windows are shut tight and the house feels sealed away from everything outside. Sometimes I think it's just the wind, but wind doesn't make that particular grinding noise, that deliberate hesitation before the final click. I was organizing papers in the kitchen when I found the photograph. Not found exactly, more like it appeared where it hadn't been before, tucked between utility bills and grocery receipts. The image was slightly blurred, showing someone standing near what might have been a fence or wall. The person's face wasn't clear, but their posture suggested they were waiting for something or someone. The photograph felt familiar in a way that made my chest tight. There had been conversations, I remember that much. Voices drifting through walls, through the gap under the back door where the weather stripping had worn thin. I couldn't make out words, but the rhythm was always the same. A question, a pause, then something that sounded almost like laughter, but not quite. My neighbor used to comment on how quiet the house was. She'd lean over the shared fence, pruning shears in hand, and mention how peaceful everything seemed. Her eyes would linger on the upstairs windows, the ones that stayed dark most afternoons. I'd nod and agree, though I wasn't sure what we were agreeing about. The basement door sticks, it always has, requiring a firm push to open fully. But sometimes I find it standing ajar, revealing just a slice of the darkness below. The air that rises from down there carries a scent I can't identify, something between old wood and something else. Something that reminds me of the way fabric smells after it's been stored too long in a place without proper ventilation. I started keeping a journal, thinking it might help me remember things more clearly. But when I read back through the entries, they don't match what I thought I'd written. Whole paragraphs seem to describe events I don't recall experiencing. References to conversations with people whose faces I can't quite bring into focus. There's an entry about finding the back door unlocked in the morning, though I always check it twice before bed. Another about hearing footsteps on the stairs when I was certain I was alone. The handwriting looks like mine, but the words feel like they belong to someone else. The photograph keeps reappearing in different places. First the kitchen, then on the coffee table, later tucked inside a book I'd been reading. Each time the image seems slightly different, as if the shadows have shifted or the figure has moved just a fraction to the left or right. I asked the neighbor about it once, showing her the picture through the gap in the fence. She studied it carefully, holding it up to catch the afternoon light. Her expression changed, something tightening around her eyes. She handed it back without saying anything, then went inside and didn't come out for the rest of the day. The house has rhythms I'm still learning to recognize. The way certain floorboards respond to temperature changes, creating small sounds that might be mistaken for footsteps. How the pipes expand and contract, producing noises that could be confused with voices if you're not paying attention. But these explanations feel too simple, like they're covering something more complex underneath. I've been having dreams about the gate. In them, I'm watching from the upstairs window as someone approaches from the street. They pause at the entrance, testing the latch, then push through into the yard. But when I try to see their face, everything becomes unclear, as if I'm looking through water or thick glass. The dreams always end the same way. The figure reaches the front door and raises their hand to knock, but the sound I hear isn't knocking. It's that same metallic scraping, the gate closing somewhere behind them. During the day, I find myself checking and rechecking the locks, though I can't remember feeling unsafe before. The routine has become automatic: front door, back door, basement, windows on the ground floor, each one secure, each one exactly as I left it, but the checking doesn't bring the relief it should. There are gaps in my memory that feel intentional, as if someone has carefully edited out certain scenes from a film. I remember the beginning of conversations, but not how they ended. I recall preparing for events that may or may not have happened. The harder I try to focus on these missing pieces, the more elusive they become. The neighbor hasn't spoken to me since the day I showed her the photograph. She still tends her garden, still hangs laundry on the line that runs parallel to our shared fence, but she doesn't look in my direction anymore. When our paths cross at the mailbox, she nods politely and hurries back inside. I wonder what she sees when she looks at my house now. Whether the windows appear as dark to her as they do to me, whether she notices the way the curtains sometimes move when there's no breeze. The journal entries have become more frequent, though I don't remember writing most of them. They describe a routine that feels both familiar and strange, checking the gate multiple times throughout the day, finding small objects moved from their usual places, hearing sounds that don't quite match their supposed sources. One entry mentions a conversation with someone who came to the door. The handwriting describes their voice as familiar, their questions as reasonable, but there's no record of what they wanted or how the conversation ended, just a note that they knew about the photograph. I've started leaving the curtains open more often, thinking that natural light might help clarify things, but the increased visibility works both ways. If I can see out more clearly, then anyone outside can see in just as well. The thought doesn't comfort me the way it should. The photograph has begun to fade, the edges becoming soft and indistinct, but the figure in the image seems more defined now, as if the deterioration of everything else has brought them into sharper focus. I can almost make out details that weren't visible before: the texture of their clothing, the angle of their shoulders, the way their hands hang at their sides. Sometimes I catch myself standing at the front window watching the gate, waiting for it to swing open, for someone to step through and walk up the faded path. The waiting feels practiced, like I've done it many times before, though I can't remember when or why. The basement door has been staying open more frequently. I close it firmly each time I notice, but it drifts ajar again within hours. The scent from below has grown stronger, more distinct. It reminds me now of something specific, though I can't quite place what. My neighbor moved away without saying goodbye. I watched from behind the curtains as strangers loaded her belongings into a truck, then drove away in the early afternoon. The new owners haven't introduced themselves yet, but I've seen them looking toward my house when they think no one is watching. The journal now contains entries I'm certain I didn't write. The handwriting is similar to mine but not identical, as if someone has been practicing my style. These new entries describe things I don't remember: visitors who came after dark, conversations held in whispers, decisions made that I can't recall making. But the details feel accurate in a way that unsettles me. References to the specific creak the front door makes when it opens, the way shadows fall across the kitchen floor in late afternoon, the sound the mailbox makes when it closes. Someone who knows the house intimately has been documenting things I should remember but don't. The photograph is almost completely faded now, just a pale rectangle with the faintest suggestion of a figure. But I don't need to see it clearly anymore. The image has become part of me, burned into my memory in a way that makes the physical copy unnecessary. I understand now why the gate never quite closes properly. It's not a mechanical problem with a latch or chain. It's an invitation, a signal that someone is welcome to enter, has always been welcome. The question isn't who might come through, but why I've been pretending not to expect them. The house feels different now, as if it's been holding its breath and has finally begun to exhale. Sounds that seemed mysterious before now feel like communications, attempts to remind me of something I chose to forget. The basement door swings open because someone needs to go down there. The curtains move because someone needs to look out. I found another photograph today, clearer than the first. It shows two figures standing near the gate, one facing toward the house, the other turned away. I recognize the posture of both, though I can't see their faces clearly. One is waiting to enter, the other is preparing to leave. The metallic scraping sound has stopped. The gate hangs open now, chain dangling loose, latch no longer catching. The path through the garden shows fresh footprints in the soft earth, leading both toward and away from the front door. Someone has been coming and going regularly, using a route that's become well established through repetition. I think I know who it is. I think I've always known. The realization doesn't bring fear exactly, more like recognition, the way you might feel when you finally remember the name of a song that's been playing in your head all day. The melody was always there, waiting for the words to catch up. I'm standing at the front window now, watching the open gate sway slightly in the evening breeze. The photograph lies on the sill beside me, almost transparent in the fading light. Soon someone will walk up the path, approach the front door, and this time I won't pretend to be surprised. The gate creaks softly, metal scraping against metal, but now the sound feels like a greeting rather than a warning. Like someone saying they're home. Story 3. The smell of morning dew mingled with the tang of freshly cut grass, filling the air as the sun peeked over the horizon. In the garden, a breeze rustled the leaves, casting playful shadows over the stone path. Everything seemed perfectly routine until I noticed the old mirror hanging in the shed, its glass devoid of any reflection. My breath caught as an unfamiliar chill settled in the air, a silent omen that something was disturbingly askew. I reach for the mirror now, months later, my fingers finding only empty air where it once hung. The shed walls hold nothing but rust stains and forgotten spider webs. Did I imagine it? The memory feels solid, tactile, but memories lie. They reshape themselves each time we handle them, like clay growing softer with warmth. The case files sit on my kitchen table, manila folders with coffee ring stains. I've read them so many times the words blur together. A missing person report. A woman who vanished from her own backyard while hanging laundry. The neighbors heard nothing, saw nothing. The clothesline still held her wet sheets when her husband came home from work. But that's not how it started for me. It started with the mirror. Or maybe it started with a phone call, my supervisor's voice, flat and administrative. We need someone to canvass the neighborhood, routine follow-up, the families asking questions. The family, always the family, circling like moths around a flame that's already burned out. I remember driving through streets lined with identical houses, mailboxes standing at attention. sprinkler systems painting arcs across emerald lawns, the kind of neighborhood where secrets grow in basement workshops and attics filled with unmarked boxes. Her house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac. Yellow crime scene tape had been removed weeks earlier, but I could still see the ghost of it in my peripheral vision. The front door was painted blue, cornflower blue maybe, or periwinkle. Colors have names I've never learned. The husband answered when I knocked, tall man with calloused hands. He offered coffee. I accepted, though I shouldn't have, getting too close. That's what my supervisor would say later when things became complicated. She loved that garden, he told me, gesturing toward the backyard through kitchen windows that needed cleaning. Spent every morning out there before work, said it helped her think. I asked about routine, about changes in behavior, about enemies or strangers who might have shown unusual interest. Standard questions with standard answers, nothing suspicious, nothing out of place. A normal marriage in a normal house on a normal street. But normal is a word that loses meaning when you repeat it enough. The backyard was smaller than I'd expected. A wooden fence marked the boundaries, a gate that squeaked when opened. The clothesline stretched between two metal poles, still bearing the rust marks where wet fabric had hung too long. That's where I saw it first, the shed tucked into the corner where the fence met the neighbor's property line, paint peeling from its sides like sunburned skin. The door hung slightly ajar, revealing darkness within. The mirror caught sunlight and threw it back in strange directions. No, that's wrong. The mirror caught nothing, reflected nothing. I stood directly in front of it and saw only darkness where my face should have been. I called out to the husband, asked about the shed, about the mirror. "What mirror?" he said. But he was standing right there. He had to see it. Unless he didn't. Unless I was seeing things that weren't there. The case file mentions a shed, searched thoroughly, contents cataloged, garden tools, fertilizer, clay pots stacked in precarious towers, a workbench covered with soil and plant debris, no mirror listed in the inventory. I've read that inventory dozens of times, memorized every item. Rake, shovel, pruning shears, watering can, bag of mulch half empty, extension cord, flashlight with dead batteries, nothing that shouldn't belong in a gardener's workspace. But I remember the mirror. The investigation stalled after 3 weeks. No evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle. A woman who simply walked out of her life and into empty air. These things happen more often than people want to believe. Adults have the right to disappear. Except she left her purse, her keys, her medication. Her coffee cup still warm on the kitchen counter. I started returning to the house on my own time, not officially, just driving by during lunch breaks or after my shift ended. Watching for movement behind those unwashed windows, looking for patterns in the way shadows fell across the yard. The husband moved out after 2 months, a rental truck in the driveway, boxes carried by friends who worked in silence. The house went up for sale but attracted no buyers. Something about the energy, a realtor told me later, people could sense it. What could they sense? What was I sensing? The new owners arrived in early autumn, a young couple with paint samples and renovation dreams. I introduced myself as a neighbor, though I lived 15 miles away, offered to help with yard work. They seemed grateful for the assistance. The shed stood empty now. Previous owners had cleared it completely. Fresh coat of paint covered the peeling boards, but in the corner where the mirror had hung, I found 4 small holes in the wood. nail holes perfectly spaced. Something had been mounted there. I measured the holes with my fingers, estimated the size, asked the young husband if he'd found anything unusual when cleaning out the shed. Just some old junk, he said, took it all to the dump. What junk, what specifically? He couldn't remember or wouldn't say. The case file includes interviews with 17 neighbors. None reported seeing anything unusual on the morning she disappeared, but several mentioned strange dreams in the weeks that followed. Dreams about mirrors, about reflections that moved independently, about faces that weren't their own staring back from bathroom glass and storefront windows. Dreams don't make it into official reports. But I wrote them down anyway, in my own notebook, in my own time. Pattern recognition is part of the job, finding connections between seemingly unrelated events, but sometimes patterns emerge where none should exist. Sometimes the mind creates meaning from randomness because randomness is too frightening to accept. I started researching mirrors, their history, their symbolism, the way different cultures interpret reflection and identity. Late nights at the library, surrounded by books that smelled like dust and forgotten conversations. Mirrors have always been associated with truth, with revelation, but also with deception, with showing us things we don't want to see. What if the mirror in the shed showed her something? What if she saw her own disappearance reflected back at her? The thought makes no logical sense, but logic and truth aren't always the same thing. I found the mirror 3 months later, not in a dump or antique shop, in my own garage, leaning against the wall where I keep holiday decorations and boxes of old tax returns. I don't remember bringing it home, don't remember deciding to keep it. But there it was. The glass was old, silvering had begun to deteriorate around the edges, creating dark spots like age marks on elderly hands. The frame was simple wood, painted white but yellowed with time. Nothing remarkable about it, nothing that would draw attention or inspire fear. I carried it inside and hung it in my hallway, looked at myself in its surface, saw my own face looking back, slightly distorted by imperfections in the glass. Normal, expected, disappointing. But sometimes in the early morning when light slants through windows at unusual angles, I catch movement in the mirror that doesn't correspond to my own. A shadow passing behind my reflection, a gesture I didn't make. I've started keeping a journal, recording these moments, trying to find patterns in the anomalies, but the more I document, the less certain I become about what I'm actually seeing. The woman who disappeared, her name was in the files, but names fade. What remains is the mystery of her absence, the question of whether she left willingly or was taken, whether she's still alive somewhere, building a new identity in a distant city, or whether she never left at all. Whether she's still there in that backyard, hanging laundry that will never dry. The husband remarried last year. I heard it through departmental gossip, someone who knew someone who worked the case. He moved to another state, started fresh, put the past behind him like a book he'd finished reading. But the past doesn't always stay behind us. Sometimes it follows us home, hangs itself on our walls, watches us through silvered glass that remembers things we've tried to forget. I've considered destroying the mirror, taking a hammer to its surface, watching it shatter into fragments that could never again show me things that shouldn't be there. But what if breaking it would release whatever it contains? What if the mirror isn't showing me ghosts, but keeping them trapped? What if she's still in there, behind the glass, waiting for someone to notice her absence from her own reflection? The case remains officially unsolved, filed away with hundreds of others, cold cases that grow colder with each passing season. But some cases never truly end. They just change form, transform from active investigations into personal obsessions, into mirrors that reflect more than they should, into questions that multiply instead of resolving, into the growing certainty that truth and reality aren't always the same thing. I look in the mirror every morning now, brush my teeth, comb my hair, perform the small rituals that connect us to our sense of self. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see her looking back. Not clearly, never clearly, just a suggestion of movement, a face that might be mine but isn't quite right, features that shift when I'm not paying attention. She's trying to tell me something. Or maybe I'm trying to tell myself something. Maybe the mirror isn't showing me her disappearance. Maybe it's showing me my own. The smell of morning dew still fills my garden. Freshly cut grass releases its green perfume into air that carries secrets I'm only beginning to understand. I water my plants and tend my flowers and try not to think about the woman who vanished while hanging laundry. But she's there in every shadow, every reflection, every moment when the familiar becomes strange and the ordinary reveals its hidden depths. I've stopped looking for her in the world outside. Now I look for her in the world within. In mirrors that remember what we've forgotten. In reflections that show us who we really are. In the space between what we say and what we know to be true. She's still there, still waiting, still trying to come home, story 4. I had just closed the cabinet door. The cool metal felt oddly unfamiliar under my fingertips, as if it belonged to someone else. A draft whispered across the back of my neck, carrying an unplaceable scent that prickled my skin. The air hung heavy, pressing down with a strange intensity. For a moment I stood still, my breath catching in my throat. I listened, waiting for the quiet to settle. But the hinge's soft click lingered, reverberating in the space around me. My pulse quickened. Something in the room had adjusted, realigned, and so had I. The cabinet held nothing remarkable. Office supplies mostly. Paper clips in neat magnetic clusters. Rubber bands wound tight, but my fingers had brushed against something else, a folder, thin and forgotten, wedged behind the hanging files. The same manila color as everything else in this place, yet somehow different, heavier, more present. I think about weight often now, how memory carries its own gravity, how some moments sink deeper than others, creating these pockets of density in the mind where thoughts collect and swirl. The folder contained 3 photographs, black and white, though not by artistic choice, the kind of institutional documentation that strips color from everything it touches. A woman's face captured from different angles, professional shots, the kind taken for identification purposes. Her eyes held a peculiar emptiness, not the vacancy of boredom, but something more deliberate, a careful absence. Or maybe I'm projecting. Memory has this way of reshaping itself, doesn't it? Each time I recall her face, it shifts slightly. The angle of her jaw, the set of her mouth. Sometimes she looks defiant, other times resigned. Today she looks almost amused, as if she knows something I don't. Which she did, of course. She knew exactly what she'd done. The case file arrived on my desk 6 weeks ago. Or was it 7? Time moves strangely when you're working backwards through someone else's life. The department had classified it as a cold case, though cold seems inadequate. Frozen, perhaps, suspended in that liminal space between resolution and abandonment. She had worked at the processing center for 11 months before she disappeared. 11 months of arriving at 7:30 each morning, taking lunch at precisely noon, leaving at 4:15. The security logs documented her movements with mechanical precision. Badge scans creating a digital breadcrumb trail that ended abruptly on a Tuesday in what I think was autumn. The last entry showed her leaving the building at her usual time. The cameras captured her walking to the parking structure, keys in hand. Her car remained in its assigned space for 3 days before someone thought to check. I've watched that footage dozens of times. She moves with purpose, but there's something rehearsed about it. Each step measured, each gesture economical. She doesn't look back, doesn't pause, doesn't acknowledge the camera that tracks her progress. It's as if she's following a script she's memorized perfectly. But scripts have endings, and hers simply stops. The processing center handled sensitive documents, financial records, insurance claims, legal filings, the paper detritus of other people's lives. Thousands of files moved through the facility each day, sorted and cataloged and digitized by workers who barely glanced at the contents. It was meant to be invisible work, the kind that happens in the margins of more important things. She had access to everything. My supervisor handed me the case with the weary expression of someone passing along a burden. Routine follow-up, he said, though nothing about it felt routine. Just dot the I's, cross the T's, probably ran off with someone. These things happen. But I don't think she ran off with someone. I don't think she ran off at all. The interviews yielded little. Her coworkers described her as quiet, competent, unremarkable. She kept to herself, ate lunch alone, never participated in the casual conversations that make workdays bearable. Several people mentioned her habit of staying late, though the security logs showed her leaving at precisely 4:15 every day. This discrepancy bothered me more than it should have. I spent hours cross-referencing timestamps, looking for patterns in the data. But the numbers never lied, only the people who remembered them. Her apartment held no clues, sparse furnishings, minimal personal effects, nothing that suggested sudden departure or struggle. The landlord said she'd paid 3 months in advance, unusual but not unprecedented. Her bank account showed regular deposits and withdrawals, all consistent with her stated income and expenses. Everything was exactly as it should be, which was precisely what made it wrong. I found myself returning to her workstation, desk 47 in the document processing bay, positioned near the window overlooking the parking structure. She would have been able to see her car from there, a small blue sedan that now sits in the evidence lot, accumulating dust and bureaucratic indifference. The desk drawers contain the usual detritus of office life: pens, sticky notes, breath mints, a small bottle of hand lotion. But tucked beneath the keyboard tray, I found something else, a piece of paper with a series of numbers written in careful script. Not random, not a phone number or address, something else entirely. The numbers corresponded to case files, specific documents that had passed through the processing center during her tenure. I spent weeks pulling those files, looking for connections, patterns, anything that might explain why she'd kept this particular list. The cases seemed unrelated at first glance. A custody dispute, an insurance claim, a property transfer, a bankruptcy filing, different people, different circumstances, different outcomes, but as I dug deeper, connections began to emerge, subtle threads linking seemingly disparate events. Money had changed hands, large amounts moved through carefully constructed channels. Names appeared and disappeared from documents with suspicious frequency. Signatures that didn't quite match their supposed owners, dates that didn't align with official timelines. She hadn't just been processing these documents, she'd been studying them, understanding them, and eventually, I think, she'd understood too much. The processing center's security footage from her final weeks showed subtle changes in her behavior. She lingered at certain workstations when their regular occupants were away. She made copies of documents that didn't require copying. She asked questions about procedures she'd been following for months. But the cameras couldn't capture what she was thinking. They couldn't record the moment when disparate pieces of information crystallized into dangerous knowledge. I interviewed her again in my mind, imagined the conversations we might have had if I'd found her before she disappeared. What would she have told me? What would she have kept hidden? The questions multiplied like cells dividing, each one spawning new uncertainties. The case files revealed a network of fraud so sophisticated it bordered on artistry. False identities layered upon legitimate documents. Phantom companies that existed just long enough to facilitate transfers before dissolving into bureaucratic vapor. Money flowing through channels designed to obscure its origin and destination. And at the center of it all, the processing center itself. The perfect cover for document manipulation. Who would suspect the people whose job it was to handle sensitive paperwork? Who would question their access, their expertise, their intimate knowledge of how the system worked? But she had questioned it. She'd seen the patterns that others missed or chose to ignore. She documented her discoveries in that careful list of numbers, building a case that would never be presented in any courtroom. Because she was gone, and with her, the evidence that might have unraveled everything. I think about her final day often, the precision of her departure, the careful choreography of her last hours. She knew what was coming. She prepared for it, but preparation and survival aren't the same thing. The parking structure holds its own secrets. Concrete levels stacked like geological strata, each one preserving its own layer of history. Tire marks, oil stains, the accumulated debris of countless arrivals and departures. Her car sat on the third level in space 47, the same number as her desk. Coincidence, or the kind of detail someone might remember when planning their exit. The vehicle yielded no forensic evidence, no signs of struggle, no indication of where she might have gone, just the lingering scent of the air freshener she'd hung from the rearview mirror. Pine trees, artificial and cloying, the smell of someone trying to mask something else. But what was she trying to hide, and from whom? The investigation stalled, other cases demanded attention. Resources were allocated elsewhere. The file grew thinner as leads were exhausted and witnesses forgot what little they'd known. I found myself the sole custodian of her story, carrying it forward through bureaucratic indifference and institutional amnesia. Late at night, when the office emptied and silence settled over the building like dust, I would spread the documents across my desk and try to see what she had seen. The patterns hidden in plain sight, the connections that revealed themselves only to those who knew how to look. Sometimes I felt close to understanding. The pieces would align momentarily, forming a picture that made terrible sense. But then morning would come, and the clarity would dissolve like frost in sunlight. The documents would become just paper again. The numbers would return to being merely numbers. But today, touching that cabinet door, feeling the cool metal beneath my fingertips, something shifted. A memory surfaced, unbidden and complete. Her hand on the same handle, 6 weeks ago when I first visited the processing center. She'd opened that same cabinet, retrieved a file, closed it with the identical soft click that now echoed in my ears. Except she'd been gone for months by then. The woman I saw was someone else entirely. A replacement, a substitute, a carefully placed decoy wearing a familiar face. Or maybe I'm losing my grip on what's real. Maybe the pressure of unsolved questions has finally cracked something essential in my ability to distinguish between fact and speculation. Maybe she really is gone, and I've been chasing shadows cast by my own desperate need for resolution. The scent that triggered this cascade of memory remains unidentifiable. Not perfume, not cleaning supplies, not the institutional staleness that permeates most office buildings. Something organic, something that speaks of places far from fluorescent lights and filing cabinets. Earth, perhaps, the smell of things buried and forgotten. I close my eyes and try to hold on to the moment, the sensation of standing at the threshold between knowing and not knowing, between certainty and doubt, between the version of events that makes sense and the one that might actually be true. When I open them again, the room looks different, smaller somehow, as if the walls have moved closer while I wasn't watching. The cabinet door remains closed, but I can feel its contents calling to me. Documents that tell stories I'm not sure I want to hear. Evidence that points toward conclusions I'm not prepared to accept. But that's the thing about truth. It doesn't require our acceptance to remain true. It simply exists, patient and persistent, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to acknowledge its presence. I think she found that truth. I think it consumed her, the way truth sometimes does when it's too large for the container of a single human life. And I think in finding it, she discovered that some knowledge is too dangerous to possess. So she disappeared herself, not dramatically, not violently, but with the same methodical precision she'd brought to document processing. She erased herself from the system as thoroughly as she'd once organized it. But erasure is never complete. Traces remain, impressions in the soft clay of memory, the ghost of a scent carried on an impossible breeze, the echo of a cabinet door closing in an empty room. I am those traces now, the repository of her unfinished investigation, the keeper of questions that may never find their answers. And standing here in this space that holds the residue of her presence, I finally understand what she discovered. Some truths are meant to stay buried. Some patterns are too dangerous to complete. Some doors, once opened, can never be properly closed again. The cabinet waits. The folder remains where I found it. The photographs continue their silent testimony to a woman who may or may not have existed in the way I remember her. And I stand at the center of it all, no longer certain whether I'm investigating her disappearance or orchestrating my own. The distinction seems less important now. What matters is the weight of knowing, the gravity of secrets that bend reality around themselves like dense stars collapsing into darkness. What matters is the choice between walking away and diving deeper into mysteries that offer no promise of resolution. I reach for the cabinet door again. My fingers find the handle with practiced ease. The metal feels familiar now, as if it's always belonged to me. As if I've been opening and closing this same door for years, decades, lifetimes. The click echoes, the room adjusts. And somewhere in the space between sound and silence, between presence and absence, between truth and the stories we tell ourselves about truth, she continues to exist. Waiting, watching, remembering everything I'm trying so hard to forget. Story 5. It began with a low, rhythmic hum, like the vibration of strings easing into silence, as if somewhere an instrument sought attention. I stood in the dim hallway where the air felt dense and close. The hum seemed to echo from the walls themselves, pulling at threads of memory not yet woven into clarity. My fingers brushed the aged wallpaper, seeking a seam in its pattern, looking for a logical source. A faint ripple of recognition passed through me, unsettling in its clarity. I found myself thinking of hidden spaces filled with dust and old echoes, places that weren't here but lingered in the mind's shadow. I shouldn't have noticed the empty hall for its lack of sound, yet I did. The house had been quiet for 3 days, that much I knew with certainty. My neighbor had asked me to check on things while she was away, visiting family in the mountains. Simple enough: water the plants, collect the mail, make sure everything looked normal from the outside. The kind of favor you do without thinking twice about it. I remember walking through her front door that first morning, keys heavy in my palm, the familiar scent of lavender and old wood greeting me. Everything appeared exactly as she'd left it. The morning light filtered through lace curtains, casting intricate shadows across the hardwood floors. Her coffee cup sat clean and inverted on the dish rack. A folded newspaper lay on the kitchen counter, unread but perfectly positioned. The plants were thriving almost suspiciously so. The African violets on the windowsill looked more vibrant than I remembered, their purple blooms fuller, their leaves a deeper green. I gave them a light sprinkle of water, though the soil felt adequately moist. Perhaps she'd prepared them well before laving. That's when I first noticed the humming. It seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper in the house, a sound so low it was almost more of a feeling than something heard. I followed it down the narrow hallway, past framed photographs of people I didn't recognize, family members perhaps, or friends from decades past. Their eyes seemed to track my movement, though I knew it was just the peculiar way old portrait photography could create that illusion. The sound led me to a door I'd never noticed before, painted the same cream color as the walls, nearly invisible except for its brass handle, worn smooth by countless hands. The humming grew stronger as I approached, vibrating through the floorboards beneath my feet. When I pressed my ear to the door, the sound stopped completely. I tried the handle, locked, which made sense. Everyone has private spaces, rooms they don't want visitors wandering into. I respected that boundary and returned to my simple tasks, watering plants and sorting mail. But the silence that followed felt wrong somehow, like the absence of a heartbeat. The second day brought similar routines. I arrived in the late afternoon, when the light had begun its golden descent toward evening. The plants still looked impossibly healthy, almost as if they were growing while I watched. The mail consisted of the usual bills and advertisements, nothing unusual. Yet something had changed. The photographs in the hallway seemed different, not moved exactly, but somehow altered. The faces looked younger or perhaps older. The expressions seemed more serious, more watchful. I told myself it was just the different quality of afternoon light playing tricks on my perception. The mysterious door remained closed, but now I could swear I detected a faint odor seeping from beneath it. Not unpleasant, but distinctive, like old paper and dried flowers, with an undertone of something metallic that made my throat feel tight. I found myself standing before it longer than necessary, my hand hovering over the brass handle. The metal felt warm, as if someone had just released their grip on it moments before my arrival. That night I dreamed of corridors that stretched infinitely inward, lined with doors that opened onto empty rooms filled with that same low humming. In the dream, I carried a set of keys that grew heavier with each door I unlocked, until their weight became unbearable and I woke with my hands clenched into fists. The third day arrived with an unseasonable chill. I wrapped my jacket tighter as I approached the house, noticing how the shadows seemed to pool more deeply around the windows. The key turned in the lock with a resistance I didn't remember from before, as if the mechanism had grown stiff overnight. Inside, the air felt different, thicker, more charged with possibility. The plants had grown noticeably, their leaves pressing against the window glass like hands seeking escape. Some of the violets had begun to bloom in colors I'd never seen before, deep purples that bordered on black, with centers that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The photographs in the hallway had definitely changed, I was certain now. The same faces, the same frames, but the people in them appeared to be looking directly at me, their expressions urgent, as if trying to communicate something vital. The humming had returned, stronger than before, accompanied by what sounded almost like whispered voices. Not words I could understand, but the rhythm and cadence of conversation, like hearing people talk in another room through thick walls. I stood before the mysterious door again, and this time the handle turned easily in my hand. The room beyond was smaller than I'd expected, windowless, lit by a single bare bulb that cast harsh shadows into every corner. The walls were lined with shelves, and on those shelves sat dozens of glass jars, each one filled with what looked like dried flowers or herbs. Labels in faded handwriting identified contents I couldn't read in the dim light. But it wasn't the jars that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the chair in the center of the room, an old wooden chair with a high back, positioned as if someone had just stood up from it. The seat cushion still bore the impression of a body, and the air around it shimmered with residual warmth. On a small table beside the chair lay an open journal, its pages covered in the same careful handwriting as the jar labels. The ink looked fresh, as if the words had been written moments before my arrival. I leaned closer to read, but the writing seemed to shift and blur before my eyes, rearranging itself into patterns that made no logical sense. The only words that remained stable were my own name, written over and over in increasingly frantic script across multiple pages. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway behind me. Slow, deliberate steps growing closer. I spun around, but the hallway was empty, the photographs staring back at me with expressions that now seemed almost apologetic. The footsteps continued, though I could see no one making them, accompanied by that low humming that seemed to vibrate through my bones. I ran then, leaving the mysterious room open behind me, fleeing through the front door and not stopping until I reached my own house. My hands shook as I tried to fit my key into my own lock, and when I finally made it inside, I drew all the curtains and sat in darkness until dawn. But even as I tell you this version of events, I feel the edges of another truth pressing against my consciousness like a half-remembered dream. Because there's another way this story might have unfolded. What if I never went to check on the house at all? What if my neighbor never asked me to? The memory of that conversation feels increasingly distant, like something I might have imagined or dreamed. What if the house I entered wasn't hers, but mine? What if I've been living there all along, tending to plants that grow too quickly, walking past photographs of people I should recognize but don't, avoiding a locked room whose key I've carried in my pocket for longer than I can remember. The humming could be coming from inside my own head, a sound my mind creates to fill the spaces where memories should be. The footsteps might be my own, echoing through halls I've walked so many times that I no longer register the movement of my feet. That journal with my name written across its pages, what if I'm the one who's been writing in it, night after night, documenting events that feel real but leave no trace in the daylight hours. Sometimes I catch myself standing in front of a mirror, and for just a moment the face looking back at me seems like a stranger's. The eyes are the right color, the features familiar, but the expression belongs to someone else, someone who knows things I've forgotten, or perhaps someone I've forgotten I used to be. The scent of lavender and old wood that I associated with my neighbor's house now seems to cling to my own clothes, my own skin. When I run my fingers along the wallpaper in my hallway, I find the same worn patterns, the same subtle tears and discolorations. The plants on my windowsill bloom in impossible colors, their growth so rapid I can almost see it happening in real time. Their roots have begun to crack the ceramic pots, reaching toward something beyond the glass, beyond the walls, beyond the boundaries of what should be possible. At night I hear voices whispering in rooms I know are empty, not threatening voices but urgent ones, as if they're trying to warn me about something I'm not ready to understand. They speak in a language that sounds almost familiar, like words I knew once but have since forgotten. The brass handle on my bedroom door has become warm to the touch, and sometimes I find it turned to positions I don't remember leaving it in. The wood around the lock shows signs of wear, as if it's been opened and closed countless times by hands that don't quite match my own. I've started keeping a journal, though I don't remember buying it. The pages fill themselves with handwriting that looks like mine, but feels foreign, documenting days I can't quite recall and events that seem to happen just outside the reach of my conscious memory. The photographs on my walls show faces that shift when I'm not looking directly at them. Family members age and grow young again, friends appear and disappear, and sometimes I catch glimpses of my own face among them, but wearing expressions I've never made, standing in places I've never been. The boundary between these two versions of reality has begun to dissolve. I no longer know if I'm the neighbor checking on an empty house or the person who lives in a house that might itself be empty, populated only by echoes and the ghosts of intentions. The humming continues, sometimes so loud it drowns out my own thoughts, sometimes so quiet I strain to hear it beneath the silence. It's become the soundtrack to my existence, the rhythm by which I measure the passage of time that may or may not be moving forward. When I look in the mirror now, I see both versions of myself simultaneously: the helpful neighbor with a simple task to complete, and the solitary figure tending impossible plants in a house that exists somewhere between memory and dream. Neither image feels more real than the other. The key in my pocket has grown warm, as if it's absorbing heat from my body, or perhaps generating its own. I know it opens the mysterious door, but I no longer know which side of that door I'm supposed to be on. Sometimes I think I hear my neighbor's voice calling to me from somewhere deep in the house, thanking me for taking such good care of things while she was away. But when I follow the sound, I find only empty rooms and the persistent scent of lavender that might be coming from flowers that exist only in my imagination. The truth is, I may never know which version of this story is real. Perhaps they both are, perhaps neither. Perhaps the act of trying to distinguish between them is what keeps me trapped in the space between certainty and doubt, walking the same hallways, tending the same plants, writing the same words in a journal that might be documenting my sanity or my slow departure from it. All I know for certain is that the humming continues, and somewhere in this house, whether it belongs to me or to someone else, a door stands open to a room I both fear and long to enter again. The plants are still growing, story 6. The clock's hands hesitated, caught in a loop that never quite completed. My reflection in the mirror refused to align, one eye lagging behind the other, an unspoken critique of symmetry. The kettle was already warm, though I hadn't turned it on today. The steam whispered a conversation I wasn't privy to. Across the room, the chair faced a different direction, slightly rotated, its legs etched deep into the carpet like footprints left in sand. I lifted my cup, feeling the weight of a second handle under my fingers. It had always been this way, except now it wasn't. I tell myself the morning started like any other. The alarm sounded at 7:30, though I'd been awake for hours, listening to the house settle into its familiar rhythms. The floorboards creaked in sequence, first the hallway, then the kitchen, then back again, as if someone was pacing. But houses do that, especially old ones. They breathe and shift, finding comfort in their own repetitive songs. She was supposed to arrive at 9. I remember checking the appointment book twice, running my finger along the neat handwriting that spelled out our arrangement. A consultation, she'd called it over the phone. Her voice had been steady, professional, with just enough vulnerability to make me believe she needed help. I'd prepared the usual materials, notebooks, pens, a box of tissues positioned strategically on the side table. The room felt ready, expectant. When she knocked, I counted 3 precise raps against the wood. I opened the door to find a woman in her 40s, auburn hair pulled back in a way that suggested control, but revealed small rebellions, a few strands that refused to cooperate. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, and she wore a coat that seemed too heavy for the season. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her shoes left no marks on the hardwood, though the soles looked damp. "I wasn't sure you'd be available on such short notice." But I had no record of short notice. The appointment had been scheduled for weeks. We sat in the living room, she in the chair that now faced a different direction, me on the sofa with my notebook balanced on my knee. She spoke about her husband, how he'd been acting strangely, staying out late, coming home with explanations that felt rehearsed. Classic signs, textbook even. I found myself nodding at appropriate intervals, offering the kind of reassurance that comes naturally after years of practice. "He says he's working late," she continued, "but his office building is dark when I drive by, empty, like it's been abandoned for months." I suggested we start with documentation, times, dates, patterns, evidence that could either confirm her suspicions or put her mind at rest. She agreed readily, pulling out a small calendar already marked with red ink. The dates formed clusters, constellations of concern that spoke to weeks of careful observation. Yet something felt rehearsed about her story too, the way she paused at certain moments, as if waiting for me to fill in details I shouldn't have known, the way her eyes flickered toward the window when she mentioned driving by the office building, as if she could see it from here, as if she expected me to see it too. The consultation lasted exactly 1 hour. She paid in cash, counting out bills that felt crisp and new, though the serial numbers seemed to blur when I tried to focus on them. We scheduled a follow-up for the next week, same time, same arrangement. She shook my hand at the door, her palm surprisingly warm despite the cold coat, and walked down the path without looking back. I watched from the window as she reached the street. For a moment, I could have sworn she turned toward a car that wasn't there, her hand reaching for a door handle that existed only in the space between certainty and doubt. But memory plays tricks. I know this better than most. The real unraveling began that evening. I was reviewing my notes when I noticed my handwriting looked different, not dramatically, but in subtle ways that made me question whether I'd actually been the one holding the pen. The letters leaned at unfamiliar angles, and certain words appeared to be written in a hand that was almost mine, but not quite, like a signature practiced in a mirror. I tried to recall specific moments from our conversation, her exact words, the way she held her cup when I offered tea, whether she'd actually accepted the tea at all. The harder I concentrated, the more the details seemed to shift, rearranging themselves into new configurations that felt both foreign and familiar. That night I dreamed of the office building she'd mentioned. In the dream, I was driving past it myself, watching the dark windows that reflected nothing. But as I looked closer, I realized the building wasn't empty at all. There were people inside, moving through the corridors like shadows, going through the motions of work that had no purpose. And in one of the windows, a figure stood perfectly still, watching me watch them. When I woke, my mouth tasted of tea I hadn't drunk, and my notebook lay open on the nightstand to a page I didn't remember writing. The handwriting was definitely mine this time, but the words made no sense. They described a conversation about a missing person, someone who had vanished from their own life so gradually that no one noticed until the absence became more real than the presence had ever been. The second version began to surface in fragments over the following days, not as clear memories, but as sensations that contradicted what I thought I knew. The feeling that she'd been in my house before, that her footsteps matched worn patterns in the carpet I'd never noticed. The certainty that when she mentioned her husband's late nights, she was describing something I had experienced rather than something she had observed. I found myself checking the appointment book obsessively, and each time I looked, the handwriting seemed less familiar. The pen strokes were confident, decisive, but they belonged to someone who knew my schedule better than I did, someone who had been planning this meeting long before I'd agreed to it. The smell lingered too, not her perfume, which had been subtle and forgettable, but something else. The scent of rain on warm pavement, of old books left open too long, of spaces that exist between what is and what might be. It clung to the chair where she'd sat, and sometimes, when the light hit it just right, I could see the impression her body had left in the fabric, even though the cushions should have recovered by now. I began to suspect that she hadn't come to me for help with her husband's infidelity, that perhaps there was no husband at all, or that the husband was not the one whose behavior needed explaining. The red marks on her calendar started to look less like documentation and more like warnings, countdowns to something I was supposed to understand but couldn't quite grasp. The most disturbing realization came when I tried to remember her face. I could recall details: the storm cloud eyes, the rebellious strands of hair, the way she held her shoulders as if carrying an invisible weight. But when I tried to put these features together into a complete picture, they wouldn't cohere. It was like trying to assemble a puzzle where the pieces belonged to different boxes, different images entirely. And yet when I looked in the mirror, something about my own reflection had changed, not dramatically, but in ways that echoed the subtle alterations I'd noticed in my handwriting. As if spending time with her had left me slightly different, shifted by degrees I couldn't measure but couldn't ignore. The follow-up appointment was scheduled for today. I've been sitting in the living room since 8:30, watching the clock's hands move in their strange, hesitant dance. The chair still faces the wrong direction, and I haven't had the courage to move it back. Part of me wonders if it was ever facing the right direction to begin with. The kettle whistles softly, though I'm certain I never turned it on. Steam rises in patterns that almost look like words, like messages written in a language I should recognize but don't. My cup sits on the table, and when I reach for it, I can still feel that second handle, the one that exists only in the space between perception and reality. I don't know if she'll come. I don't know if she ever came at all, or if the woman I remember was someone else entirely, someone whose story intersected with mine in ways that neither of us fully understood. The appointment book lies open beside me, and the handwriting shifts each time I look away and back again, as if it's being rewritten by invisible hands. What I do know is that the house feels different now, inhabited by possibilities I hadn't considered before. The floorboards creak in new sequences, and the shadows fall at angles that don't match the position of the sun. My reflection in the mirror continues its subtle rebellion, one eye always a fraction behind the other, as if it's trying to show me something I'm not ready to see. The clock strikes 9 and I wait, whether for her arrival or for the understanding that has been hovering just beyond my reach, I cannot say. The only certainty is that something began that morning, something that cannot be easily categorized or explained. Something that exists in the space between the story I tell myself and the truth that whispers from the steam of a kettle I never turned on. The chair faces away from me now, toward a window that shows a street I'm no longer sure I recognize. And in the distance, barely visible through the glass, a figure stands beside a car that may or may not be there, waiting for an answer to a question I'm only beginning to understand. Story 7. The candle flame flickered out as I turned my back. The room's warmth escaped, leaving whispers of its absence on my skin. My footsteps absorbed the creaking floorboards, rhythmically familiar yet uneven, like a heartbeat skipping in an echoing chest. Dust clung to my fingertips when I brushed against the old wooden shelf, gritty and old, as if holding a secret too delicate to unfold. Something in the air hesitated, hovering between comfort and unease. The shadows shifted, and I knew the floor hadn't settled the same. I tell myself it was the wind that snuffed out the candle. The old house breathes through its weathered bones, sighs escaping from gaps in the window frames. That's what I've always believed anyway. The logical explanation sits easier in my mind than the alternatives that creep in during the quiet hours. She had been sitting in the chair by the fireplace when I last saw her. The burgundy velvet cushion still holds the impression of her slight frame, a depression that seems too deep for someone so small. Her knitting needles rest crossed on the side table, silver points catching what little light filters through the heavy curtains. The yarn a soft blue that reminded her of summer skies trails from the basket to the floor in a gentle arc. I remember walking into the kitchen to prepare her evening tea. The kettle's whistle had been sharp, insistent. Steam rose from the spout in ghostly spirals, and I'd counted out the precise number of sugar cubes she preferred. 2, always 2. The china cup with its delicate rose pattern waited on the tray, the one her mother had given her decades ago. When I returned, she was gone. The front door stood slightly ajar, cold air seeping through the gap like water through a crack in a dam. Her house slippers remained by the chair, leather soles worn smooth from years of shuffling across these same floorboards. The logical part of my mind constructed the sequence. She'd heard something outside, perhaps the neighbor's cat in her garden again, and stepped out to investigate. Elderly people often forget to put on proper shoes in their urgency. But my fingertips remember something different. They recall the texture of fabric, rough and resistant. The muscle memory in my palms speaks of pressure, of something yielding then going still. My shoulders ache with phantom weight, as if I'd carried something heavy down a long corridor. The search began immediately. I called out her name into the gathering dusk, my voice echoing off the houses that lined the quiet street. Porch lights flickered on in response, concerned faces appearing at windows. The neighbors emerged with flashlights, their beams cutting through the darkness like accusatory fingers. We combed through her garden, past the rose bushes she'd tended with such devotion. The thorns caught at my sleeves, leaving tiny tears in the fabric. Her prized tomatoes hung heavy on their vines, unpicked and beginning to wrinkle in the cool night air. The garden gate hung open, its hinges groaning softly in the breeze. Yet something else tugs at my consciousness, a memory that feels more like a dream, or perhaps a dream that feels like memory. I see myself in the basement, the single bare bulb casting harsh shadows on the stone walls, the air down there tastes of earth and secrets. My hands move with purpose, though I can't quite grasp what that purpose might be. The shovel feels familiar in my grip, its wooden handle worn smooth by use. The official search lasted 3 days. Police officers walked methodically through the surrounding woods, their radios crackling with updates and coordinates. A helicopter circled overhead, its rotors beating the air like mechanical wings. They found nothing. No trace, no sign of struggle, no indication of where she might have gone. I answered their questions with patience and growing concern. Yes, she'd been confused lately. Yes, she sometimes forgot where she was. The detective, a tired man with kind eyes, nodded sympathetically as I explained her increasing disorientation. Wandering was common in cases like hers, he said. The elderly sometimes simply walked away, following some internal compass that led them far from safety. But my dreams tell a different story. In them I'm standing in the kitchen again, but the kettle isn't whistling. Instead, there's shouting. Her voice, usually so gentle, raised in fear or anger. My own voice responds, though I can't make out the words. The sound of something breaking china, perhaps, or glass. The crash echoes through my sleeping mind like a stone dropped in still water. The house feels different now. Sounds carry strangely through the rooms, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. I've taken to sleeping in a guest room because her bedroom feels too heavy, too full of presence and absence simultaneously. The floorboards there creak in patterns that don't match my footsteps. During the day, I maintain the routines she would have wanted. I water her plants, though some are already beginning to droop despite my care. I collect the mail from the box at the end of the drive, sorting through bills and advertisements she'll never see. The normalcy of these tasks feels like a performance, as if I'm acting the part of the concerned caretaker for an invisible audience. But in the quiet moments between these activities, other sensations surface. The phantom ache in my lower back, as if I'd spent hours bent over difficult work. The way my hands sometimes tremble when I'm not thinking about controlling them. The taste of copper that occasionally floods my mouth without warning. I've started finding things in strange places. Her reading glasses tucked behind books she never read. A single earring in a kitchen drawer among the utensils. Her favorite coffee mug, the one with the chip on the handle, sitting in the basement beside the old furnace. I don't remember putting it there, yet there it sits, gathering dust as if it's been there for weeks. The neighbors have been kind. They bring casseroles and offer gentle words of support. The woman from across the street mentions seeing her in the garden the morning before she disappeared, waving from among her roses. But something in her eyes suggests uncertainty, as if she's not quite sure what she actually saw versus what she thinks she should have seen. I nod and thank them for their concern, but their stories feel like echoes of something that happened to someone else. In my bones, I carry a different narrative, one where the morning was filled with tension, where words were exchanged that can't be taken back, where the careful balance we'd maintained for months finally shattered like her mother's china cup. The basement door has developed a habit of standing open. I close it each night before bed, turning the handle firmly and listening for the click of the latch. Yet each morning I find it ajar again, as if something below needs air to breathe. The steps leading down are worn smooth by decades of use, and sometimes I catch myself counting them without conscious intention. 13 steps, always 13. Sleep brings no relief from the questions. I dream of digging, of earth black and rich between my fingers. The soil has a smell I recognize, but can't place organic and final, like autumn leaves left too long in the rain. In these dreams I work by moonlight, the shovel biting into the ground with rhythmic precision. The hole grows deeper with each stroke, and something tells me I know exactly how deep it needs to be. When I wake, there's dirt under my fingernails. The official investigation has wound down to occasional check-ins and updated missing person reports. The detective stops by less frequently now, his questions more routine than hopeful. He speaks of statistics, of how these cases sometimes remain unsolved for years before resolution comes from unexpected directions. I listen and nod, playing my part in this strange theater, but inside, the two versions of truth wage their quiet war. The rational explanation that she wandered away in confusion and met with some accident or misfortune competes with the darker knowledge that lives in my muscles and bones. Sometimes I catch myself preparing 2 cups of tea, then staring at the extra cup as if it materialized from thin air. The automatic gesture feels both natural and impossible. How can I miss someone while simultaneously carrying the weight of what I might have done? The garden continues to grow wild without her attention. The roses bloom and fade unchecked, their petals littering the ground like scattered thoughts. I should tend to them, I know, but something keeps me away from that corner of the yard. The soil there seems different, somehow darker, more fertile than it should be. Standing at the kitchen window, I watch the seasons change outside while inside time feels suspended. The truth hovers just beyond my grasp, shifting between the version I can live with and the one that lives within my body's memory. Both feel equally real and equally impossible. The candle I lit tonight gutters in its holder, wax pooling around the base like tears. Soon it will burn out completely, leaving me in darkness with only the sound of my own breathing and the house's subtle settling. In that darkness, I know the questions will come again, patient and persistent as tide. Perhaps some truths are too heavy to carry in the light of day. Perhaps the mind protects itself by offering alternatives, by creating stories we can bear to tell. Or perhaps the body remembers what the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. I blow out the remaining flame and listen to the darkness settle around me like a familiar coat. Tomorrow I'll water her plants again, sort through her mail, and answer any questions that come my way. But tonight, in the space between sleeping and waking, I'll carry both versions of the truth and wonder which one will claim me first. The basement door creaks open in the distance, and I don't get up to close it. Story 8. My eyes were fixed on the dimly lit corner of the room, a space that seemed to resist the glow from the single lamp. The shadows stretched further than they should have, like invisible hands creeping along the walls. Each creak and distant tap seemed to thicken the air, layering a sense of unease. The clock above ticked at its usual pace, yet every second felt drawn out, hesitant. I waited, unsure of what exactly for, perhaps the arrival of some unseen presence. Then, just at the edge of the light, an object shifted a frame askew, previously unnoticed. I knew what had happened that night. The sequence of events played out in my mind with crystalline clarity, each moment falling into place like dominoes in a perfectly arranged line. She had come home late, as she often did after her evening walks. The front door had closed with its familiar soft click, followed by the gentle sound of her shoes being placed beside the entrance. I had been reading in my chair, the same leather armchair where I now sat, watching that corner where the photograph hung slightly crooked. The investigation had been thorough but brief. The authorities concluded it was an accident, a tragic slip on the stairs leading to the basement. The wooden steps were old, worn smooth by decades of use, and the lighting had always been poor down there. She must have been carrying something, they reasoned, perhaps laundry or items for storage. The medical examiner found nothing suspicious. A simple fall, a terrible twist of fate that could happen to anyone in an old house like ours. I had accepted this explanation completely. It made sense. The basement stairs were treacherous, something we had discussed many times. She had always been careful, but careful people have accidents too. The insurance company processed the claim without question. Friends and neighbors offered their condolences, speaking in hushed tones about how these things just happen sometimes, how we never know when our time will come. But now, sitting in this chair for what felt like the 100th time since that night, I found myself staring at that photograph. It showed the two of us from several summers ago, standing beside the garden she had loved so much. Her smile was genuine, her eyes bright with something I had once interpreted as happiness. The frame had always hung straight before. I was certain of that. She had been meticulous about such details, adjusting pictures and straightening objects with an almost obsessive precision. When had it shifted, I tried to remember the last time I had really looked at that corner, the last time I had noticed the photograph hanging perfectly level. The memory felt slippery, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. Had it been crooked immediately after the accident, or had it moved more recently? The question seemed trivial, yet it lodged itself in my mind like a splinter. I rose from the chair and approached the frame, reaching up to straighten it. As my fingers touched the glass, a detail caught my attention that I had somehow missed before. In the background of the photograph, barely visible behind her shoulder, was the basement door. It stood slightly ajar, just a crack of darkness visible in the image. She never left doors open, never. It was one of her quirks, something that had occasionally annoyed me. Every door had to be properly closed, every cabinet shut completely. The photograph had been taken during a dinner party we had hosted. I remembered the evening well, or thought I did. Our guests had complimented her cooking, praised the garden, admired the house. She had been the perfect hostess, attentive and gracious. But now, looking at this frozen moment, I wondered what she had been doing near the basement that day. Why was the door open behind her? I set the frame back on its hook, ensuring it hung straight, but my hands trembled slightly as I did so. The tremor surprised me. I had been steady through everything, the funeral arrangements, the paperwork, the endless questions from well-meaning friends. Yet now, faced with this small inconsistency in a photograph, my composure began to crack. Walking to the basement door, I found myself hesitating before opening it. The hallway suddenly felt colder, though the heating system worked perfectly well. I turned the handle and peered down into the darkness below. The wooden steps descended into shadows, the handrail worn smooth by countless trips up and down. This was where they found her, crumpled at the bottom, her neck bent at an impossible angle. But as I stood there, breathing in the musty air that rose from below, another memory surfaced. The night of the accident, I had been awakened not by the sound of a fall, but by something else entirely. A door closing, perhaps, or footsteps on the floor above. The memory was vague, dreamlike, the kind of half-conscious awareness that comes in the space between sleep and waking. I had dismissed it then, assumed it was part of a dream or the normal settling sounds of an old house. Now I wondered if I had been wrong. I descended the stairs slowly, testing each step as I went. The wood was indeed worn, but it felt solid beneath my feet. The handrail was secure, properly attached to the wall. At the bottom, I stood in the exact spot where she had been found and looked back up toward the light streaming down from the doorway above. The angle seemed wrong somehow. If she had simply slipped and fallen, wouldn't she have landed closer to the stairs themselves? The basement smelled of dampness and old wood, scents that had always been present but now seemed more pronounced. I moved through the familiar space, past the furnace and water heater, past the shelves of stored belongings and seasonal decorations. Everything appeared exactly as it should, yet something felt different. The air itself seemed to hold secrets, whispered conversations I could almost but not quite hear. In the far corner behind a stack of cardboard boxes, I noticed something that made me stop. A small dark stain on the concrete floor, roughly circular, about the size of a dinner plate. I knelt down and examined it more closely. It could have been anything: spilled paint, leaked oil, water damage from a long ago flood. But it was positioned oddly, far from where she had fallen, far from any obvious source of spillage. The stain looked relatively fresh, darker around the edges where it had pooled and dried. I touched it with my fingertip and found it completely dry, but there was a faint metallic smell that made my stomach clench. I had noticed this odor before, in the days immediately following the accident, but had attributed it to the old pipes, or perhaps something stored in the basement that had gone bad. Standing up, I felt dizzy for a moment, as if the basement was spinning slowly around me. The familiar space suddenly seemed foreign, threatening. I had spent countless hours down here over the years, organizing storage, maintaining the furnace, pursuing various hobbies and projects. It had been my refuge, a place where I could work with my hands and think clearly. Now it felt like a crime scene. But that was ridiculous. The police had examined everything thoroughly. They had found no evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle, nothing to suggest anything other than a tragic accident. I was letting my imagination run wild, seeing mysteries where none existed. Grief could do that to a person, I told myself. It could make the familiar seem strange, the innocent seem sinister. Yet as I climbed back up the stairs, I found myself moving more quickly than necessary, eager to escape the basement's oppressive atmosphere. At the top, I closed the door firmly behind me and turned the lock, something I had never done before. The click of the mechanism engaging seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet house. Back in the living room, I settled into my chair again, but the sense of unease followed me. The photograph hung straight now, but I could not stop staring at it, analyzing every detail, searching for clues I might have missed. Her expression, which I had always read as contentment, now seemed more complex. There was something in her eyes, a wariness or perhaps resignation that I had never noticed before. Had she been afraid of something? The question arose unbidden, unwelcome. She had never mentioned being frightened, had never expressed concern about her safety or asked me to check locks or investigate strange noises. She had seemed perfectly normal in the days leading up to the accident, following her usual routines, tending her garden, reading her books, taking her evening walks. But now I wondered if I had been paying attention, really paying attention. Marriage could become comfortable to the point of invisibility, where you lived alongside someone without truly seeing them anymore. Had I missed signs of distress? Had there been conversations I should have initiated, questions I should have asked? The evening walks suddenly seemed significant in a way they never had before. She had started taking them several months ago, claiming she needed the exercise and fresh air. I had encouraged her, thinking it was a healthy habit, but where exactly had she gone on these walks? She had never provided detailed accounts of her routes, never mentioned people she had encountered or interesting things she had seen. When I asked about her walks, her responses had been vague, generic. I tried to remember the last conversation we had about her evening routine. It had been casual, unremarkable at the time. She had mentioned enjoying the quiet streets, the way the neighborhood looked different in the fading light. But there had been something in her tone, a hesitation or perhaps careful selection of words that I was only now beginning to recognize. The house felt too quiet around me, filled with the absence of her presence, but it was more than that. It felt watchful, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to be discovered or revealed. Every small sound seemed amplified: the refrigerator's hum, the settling of floorboards, the distant murmur of traffic from the main road. I found myself listening for footsteps that would never come, for the sound of her key in the front door, for her voice calling my name from another room. But underneath that natural longing was something else, a growing suspicion that perhaps I should be listening for different sounds entirely. Sounds that might indicate I was not as alone in this house as I believed. The thought was absurd, of course. The doors were locked, the windows secure. No one else had a key, and there was no evidence that anyone had entered the house uninvited. Yet I could not shake the feeling that something was watching me, measuring my reactions, waiting to see what I would do next. As darkness fell outside, the shadows in the living room grew deeper, more complex. The single lamp that had provided adequate light during the day now seemed insufficient, leaving too many corners in darkness, too many spaces where someone or something might hide unobserved. I considered turning on additional lights, but something held me back. If I was being watched, I did not want to appear afraid. But I was afraid. The admission came reluctantly, accompanied by a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. I was afraid of what I might discover if I continued to examine that night too closely. I was afraid of what the truth might reveal about her, about our marriage, about myself. Most of all, I was afraid that the accident might not have been an accident at all. And if it was not an accident, then someone in this house was not who they claimed to be. The photograph seemed to mock me from its straightened frame, holding its secrets behind glass and chemical emulsion. In the growing darkness, her smile looked different, less genuine, more like a mask worn for the camera's benefit. The basement door in the background appeared more ominous now, a portal to hidden truths I was only beginning to suspect. I sat in my chair, surrounded by familiar objects that no longer felt familiar, in a house that no longer felt like home, waiting for answers that might never come. The clock continued its steady ticking, marking time that seemed both endless and running out. And in the corner where the shadows gathered thickest, I could swear something was moving, shifting, preparing to reveal itself when I was finally ready to see Story 9. The air felt thick with dust as I let the curtain fall back into place. A familiar hum teased the periphery of my hearing, like an old machine refusing to quiet down. My fingertips brushed over the rough wallpaper, and a shiver ran up my arm like a silent warning. The room carried an odd tension, weighty and unseen, pressing against my skin. As I turned to leave, a subtle shift in the shadows caught my eye. The light had dimmed, but something underneath it felt sharper, almost whispering to be noticed. I keep coming back to that wallpaper. The pattern repeats itself in spirals that never quite close, leaving gaps where the eye expects completion. Someone chose this design deliberately. Someone lived with it, stared at it during sleepless nights, traced those incomplete circles with their gaze until madness crept in through the spaces between. The photographs were still there when I found them, not hidden exactly, but placed where only someone looking would see them. Behind the loose baseboard, wrapped in plastic that crackled like autumn leaves, the faces in the images seemed familiar, though I couldn't place them at first. Later, much later, I realized why. She used to hum while she worked. I remember that now, though I'm not sure when exactly I heard it. The melody was simple, repetitive, the kind of tune that burrows into your skull and refuses to leave. Sometimes I catch myself humming it, and I have to stop, bite my tongue until the taste of copper fills my mouth. The basement door was always locked. I noticed that from the beginning, though I didn't think much of it then. Old houses have their secrets, their forgotten spaces, but the key hung on a nail beside the kitchen window, worn smooth by countless fingers. Someone had been going down there regularly. I found the journal wedged between two floorboards that creaked when you walked over them. The handwriting was careful, controlled, but the words themselves seemed to spiral like that wallpaper pattern. Entries about watching, about waiting, about the way shadows move when you're not looking directly at them. The neighbors never mentioned her. When I asked about the previous tenant, their eyes would shift away, focusing on something just past my shoulder. One woman mentioned seeing lights at odd hours, but then she laughed it off, said she must have been mistaken. People see what they want to see, she said, or what they need to see. There's a stain on the kitchen floor that won't come clean. I've scrubbed it with everything I could find, but it remains, shaped like a hand reaching toward the door. The realtor said it was just water damage, but water doesn't leave marks that dark, doesn't soak into wood with that kind of permanence. The humming started again last week. I thought it was me at first, that unconscious echo of a melody I couldn't shake, but then I realized it was coming from somewhere else, somewhere below. The basement door was still locked, the key still hanging by the window, but the sound drifted up through the floorboards like smoke. I remember her face now. It was in one of the photographs, but also something more immediate, more present. The woman who lived here before me had the same eyes as the girl in the pictures, though separated by what must have been decades. The same careful smile that never quite reached those eyes. The journal entries grow stranger toward the end. She writes about conversations with someone who doesn't answer back, about meals prepared for two when she lived alone, about the sound of footsteps in the basement when she knew no one else was there. The final entry is just one line, repeated until it fills the entire page. She's coming home. I've been leaving food out, just small portions, things that won't be missed if they disappear. But they do disappear, and I tell myself it's mice, or that I'm misremembering what I left. The alternative requires acceptance of something I'm not ready to face. The photographs show a progression, though not in any order I can decipher. A young girl, then a teenager, then gaps where pictures should be, then an older woman who might be the same person, though the years between have carved deep lines around her eyes. In the final image, she's standing in this very kitchen, looking directly at the camera with an expression I can't quite read. The basement key is warm to the touch. I've held it several times now, feeling its weight, imagining the click of the lock turning. But something stops me each time, some instinct that whispers warnings in a voice that sounds suspiciously like my own. The humming has grown louder. It follows a pattern now, rising and falling like breathing, like someone trying to communicate in the only way they know how. I've started humming along sometimes, and in those moments the house feels less empty, though not necessarily less dangerous. I found more photographs today, these ones hidden inside the medicine cabinet. They show the same progression, but from different angles, as if someone else was documenting the same life from the shadows. The final image is of this room, this very spot where I'm sitting now, but taken from below, as if the photographer was crouching beneath the floorboards. The journal has new entries. I know this is impossible, but the evidence sits before me in handwriting that matches the earlier pages perfectly. These new words speak of waiting, of patience rewarded, of the satisfaction that comes when a long hunt finally reaches its conclusion. They speak of me. The neighbors have stopped making eye contact. When I wave from the window, they turn away quickly, as if acknowledging my presence might invite something they're not prepared to handle. The mailman leaves packages at the end of the driveway now, though I've never complained about his service. I understand the wallpaper pattern now. Those spirals aren't incomplete at all. They're perfect circles viewed from the wrong angle, distorted by perspective until they appear broken. Everything depends on where you're standing when you look. The basement door stands open this morning, though I know I didn't unlock it. The key still hangs by the window, but somehow the barrier between upstairs and down has dissolved. The humming drifts up more clearly now, and I can almost make out words hidden in the melody. She's in the photographs I took yesterday, standing behind me in the mirror's reflection, though I was alone when the shutter clicked. Her smile is exactly as I remember it from the hidden pictures, careful and patient and somehow satisfied. She's been waiting such a long time. The journal's final entry appeared sometime during the night, written in handwriting that looks increasingly like my own. It speaks of circles closing, of patterns completing themselves, of the moment when the hunter realizes they've become the hunted. It ends with a question that I'm afraid to answer. The humming has stopped, but the silence feels more ominous than the sound ever did. In the sudden quiet, I can hear something else, the soft whisper of footsteps moving through rooms I thought were empty, the gentle creak of floorboards adjusting to weight they shouldn't be bearing. I'm writing this now because I need to record what I've discovered, though I suspect no one will believe it. The photographs, the journal, the mysterious previous tenant, they were all breadcrumbs leading to this moment, this understanding that some hunts span decades, that some patience runs deeper than death itself. The basement waits below, and I know now that I'll have to go down there eventually. The key hangs warm and ready by the window, and the door stands open like a mouth preparing to swallow. But first, I need to add my own entry to the journal, my own photograph to the collection. Someone else will find these things someday, just as I did. They'll trace the same patterns, follow the same spirals, hum the same melody until it becomes part of their breathing. They'll think they're investigating a mystery, never realizing they're simply the next chapter in a story that refuses to end. The wallpaper pattern shifts again as I watch, and I finally see what I've been missing all along. Story 10. It wasn't the first time the hallway seemed longer than usual. Patterns in the carpet confessed a heavier tread, though I never bothered to follow them. An odd smell lingered near the elevator, something metallic perhaps, but it faded quickly enough. The office lights flickered a bit, but they always did on windy days. I flipped through the pages of an open notebook, noting a half-finished sentence that wasn't mine. I suppose I should have straightened the chairs before I left. The last light switch by the exit felt cold to the touch, but I left it on anyway. The coffee mug sits on my desk this morning, stained with rings from countless refills. Its handle bears the faint impression of teeth marks along the ceramic rim. I remember buying this mug from the gift shop downstairs, but the memory feels borrowed somehow, like watching someone else's home movie. The coffee inside has grown cold overnight, forming a thin skin across the surface that wrinkles when I breathe too close. I never leave coffee unfinished. My mother taught me that waste was a sin, and old habits cling like cobwebs in corners you forget to clean. The filing cabinet in the corner holds documents I organized last month, yet the folders appear reshuffled. Tab labels face different directions now, some bent backward as if someone rifled through them in darkness. The metal drawer slides with a grinding sound that sets my teeth on edge. Inside, manila folders huddle together like frightened animals. One file contains photographs I don't remember taking, images of empty conference rooms shot from odd angles. The timestamp reads a date I spent at home with the flu, but cameras don't lie the way memory does. My colleague's desk across the room tells its own story through accumulated debris. Sticky notes cluster around the computer monitor like yellow butterflies drawn to artificial light. Her handwriting slants leftward in urgent scribbles, phone numbers without names, appointments without times. A prescription bottle sits beside her keyboard, label facing away from curious eyes. The pills inside rattle when the air conditioning kicks on, a sound like distant rain on a tin roof. She mentioned headaches lately, migraines that steal whole afternoons and leave her pale as winter sky. The conference room window overlooks the parking garage where shadows pool between concrete pillars. My car sits in its usual spot, third row from the entrance, but something about its position seems wrong. The angle suggests someone moved it slightly, perhaps to access the vehicle parked behind. Scratches along the passenger door catch morning light, thin silver lines that weren't there yesterday. I keep my keys in the same pocket always, yet this morning they felt heavier somehow, as if someone had added weight I couldn't see. The telephone on my desk blinks with a message I don't remember receiving. The red light pulses like a mechanical heartbeat, urgent and insistent. When I press play, static fills the earpiece, followed by breathing that might be my own. The timestamp indicates the call came through after hours, when the building locks itself against the outside world. Security cameras watch empty hallways then, recording nothing but the slow dance of settling dust and shifting shadows. I delete the message without listening to the end. The bathroom mirror reflects fluorescent lights that hum with electrical tension. My reflection looks tired, older somehow than yesterday's version. Dark circles beneath my eyes suggest sleepless nights I don't recall having. The soap dispenser drips pink liquid onto white porcelain, each drop spreading like diluted blood. Paper towels overflow the waste basket, some bearing lipstick stains in shades I never wear. The automatic faucet responds to movement that isn't there, water flowing for invisible hands. The supplied closet door stands slightly ajar, though I always ensure it stays locked. Inside, boxes of copy paper tower toward the ceiling like a paper metropolis. Someone has disturbed the neat stacks, leaving gaps where boxes once stood. The floor shows scuff marks from dragged items, parallel lines leading toward the back wall. A maintenance uniform hangs on a hook, still damp with perspiration that smells of fear and exertion. The fabric holds the shape of someone smaller than the person assigned to wear it. The elevator buttons show fingerprints that don't match my own. Whoever pressed them last had smaller hands, with nails bitten down to pink crescents. The metal surface reflects distorted images of passengers who aren't there, ghostly figures that vanish when I look directly. Between floors, the elevator shudders as if carrying weight beyond its capacity. The emergency phone hangs slightly askew, its cord stretched as though someone pulled it recently. I wonder who they tried to call and whether anyone answered. The parking garage stairwell echoes with footsteps that stop when I pause to listen. Concrete walls weep moisture that never fully dries, creating abstract patterns like ink blot tests. The handrail feels sticky beneath my palm, as if someone with nervous hands had gripped it too tightly. Emergency lighting casts everything in sickly yellow tones that make healthy skin look jaundiced. On the third landing, I find a single earring, small and silver, that rolls away when I try to pick it up. The security desk in the lobby sits unmanned more often lately. The guard's coffee grows cold in a thermos decorated with family photos. His logbook shows entries in different handwriting, some barely legible, others precise as typewriter text. The timestamp clock runs slow, creating gaps in the official record where minutes disappear like lost thoughts. Multiple sets of keys hang on hooks behind the desk, each labeled for areas I didn't know existed. One kite feels warm to the touch, as if recently used. The break room refrigerator hums with mechanical persistence, its interior light revealing forgotten lunches growing exotic molds. Someone has left a birthday cake on the middle shelf, though no one mentioned celebrations. The frosting has begun to separate, revealing layers underneath like geological strata. Plastic forks stick up from the surface like tiny grave markers. The cake knife lies beside it, blade still sticky with something that might be frosting, but reflects light differently than sugar should. The photocopier in the hallway runs without human intervention, producing pages that emerge blank except for faint impressions of text that was never there. The glass surface bears handprints pressed against it from underneath, as if someone had been trapped inside the machine itself. Toner dust coats everything nearby in fine black powder that clings to skin and clothing. The paper tray empties itself throughout the day, sheets disappearing into some hungry mechanical void that never quite satisfies its appetite. The storage room beneath the main floor contains boxes labeled with dates that predate the building's construction. Dust motes dance in flashlight beams like microscopic snow, settling on surfaces that show recent disturbance. Someone has been moving things around down here, creating pathways through the accumulated debris of forgotten projects. A desk lamp sits plugged into a wall outlet, its bulb casting circles of light that reveal more shadows than they illuminate. The electrical cord runs along the floor like a snake seeking prey. The ventilation system carries sounds from other floors, voices having conversations I can't quite understand. Words drift through metal ducts like whispered secrets, losing meaning as they travel through the building's mechanical arteries. Sometimes I hear my own name spoken in tones that range from concern to accusation. The air that flows from ceiling vents tastes metallic, as if it has passed through spaces where copper pipes blade green rust into the atmosphere. The janitor's cart sits abandoned in hallways more frequently now, its contents suggesting interrupted work. Cleaning supplies cluster together like chemical conspirators, their labels warning of dangers in multiple languages. The mop bucket holds water that never seems to get dirty despite repeated use. Rubber gloves draped over the cart's edge retain the shape of hands that wore them, fingers curved as if still grasping something invisible. The cart's wheels leave tracks on freshly cleaned floors, patterns that suggest it moves of its own accord. The reception area phone rings at intervals that follow no discernible pattern. When answered, the line carries sounds of breathing interspersed with mechanical clicking, as if someone were typing on an old manual typewriter. The caller never speaks, yet somehow conveys urgency through the rhythm of their silence. After hanging up, the phone feels warm against my ear, retaining heat from conversations that never quite happened. The message light blinks in sequences that might be code if I knew how to read them. The main entrance door shows wear patterns that don't match normal traffic flow. Someone has been using this entrance at unusual times, their footsteps wearing grooves in marble that took decades to develop. The security system logs entries and exits in a database that sometimes contradicts itself, showing people leaving who never arrived, arriving who never left. Door handles turn before hands touch them, as if the building itself were trying to let something in or keep something out. The conference room table bears water rings from glasses that were never there, circular stains that appear overnight like crop circles in wood grain. Meeting notes scattered across its surface contain handwriting that shifts between sessions, transforming from neat cursive to frantic printing. The whiteboard holds equations that solve themselves while no one watches, numbers rearranging into patterns that hurt to contemplate directly. Dry erase markers roll across the table during still moments, drawing lines toward conclusions I'm not ready to reach. The ceiling tiles above my workspace show signs of recent disturbance, dust patterns suggesting someone has been moving through spaces meant to remain undisturbed. Acoustic panels sag under weight they weren't designed to bear. Between the tiles, darkness holds shapes that might be pipes or cables or something else entirely. During quiet moments, I hear scratching sounds from above, as if small animals were building nests in the building's skeleton. But the sounds follow patterns too deliberate for random creatures. The basement archives contain files that reorganize themselves according to logic I can't fathom. Documents migrate from folder to folder like paper birds seeking better nests. Some pages bear signatures that change when I'm not looking directly at them, names transforming into other names with subtle shifts in penmanship. The filing system follows an order that makes sense only to whoever redesigned it during hours when the building sleeps. Dust covers everything except the files someone has been reading recently. The window blinds in my office twist open and closed without wind or human intervention, creating patterns of light and shadow that spell words in languages I don't recognize. Dust motes caught in sunbeams form shapes that linger too long to be random, geometric patterns that suggest intelligence behind their arrangement. The glass itself bears impressions of hands pressed against it from the inside, though I work on the 15th floor and nothing flies at that height except things that shouldn't exist. The elevator shaft echoes with sounds of machinery that isn't there, cables singing under tension that defies the building's specifications. Between floors, the car pauses at levels that don't appear on any blueprint I've seen. The button panel sometimes displays numbers higher than the building's actual height, destinations that exist only in vertical space that mathematics can't account for. During these pauses, the air grows thick with possibility and the metallic taste of approaching storms. The parking garage security camera monitors screens that show empty spaces filled with vehicles that cast no shadows. Time stamps on the footage jump forward and backward like a film editor's nightmare, creating gaps where important events hide from electronic observation. The cameras themselves turn to follow movement that isn't there, mechanical eyes tracking ghosts through concrete corridors. Some recordings play in reverse, showing people walking backward into futures they've already left behind. The building's master key opens doors that shouldn't exist, revealing rooms that don't appear on architectural plans. These spaces contain furniture covered in white sheets like sleeping giants waiting for resurrection. The air in these hidden rooms tastes of memories and forgotten purposes, thick with the weight of conversations that ended before they began. Light switches control fixtures that illuminate nothing, casting darkness that seems more substantial than the shadows it creates. The fire alarm system tests itself at irregular intervals, sensors detecting smoke from fires that never burned. Emergency lighting activates during these tests, bathing everything in red warning light that makes familiar spaces look like the interior of a beating heart. The alarm's electronic voice announces evacuations for emergencies that exist only in the building's nervous system, a mechanical anxiety disorder that spreads through wiring like digital disease. The final inspection reveals that nothing has changed and everything is different. The hallway measures the same length it always has, yet somehow contains more distance than before. Carpet patterns show the same wear, but now they seem to point toward destinations that don't exist on any map. The elevator smell has faded completely, leaving behind air that tastes of questions without answers. Office lights flicker with their usual rhythm, but now the pattern spells messages in a code I'm beginning to understand. The notebook still lies open to that half-finished sentence, but now I recognize the handwriting as my own from tomorrow. The chairs remain exactly as I left them, arranged for a meeting that hasn't happened yet. The light switch by the exit still feels cold, but now I understand it's trying to warn me about something I haven't learned to see.